Welcome to the Eye of Power podcast. I'm your host, Tom Dardick. But this podcast is not about me. It's about you and your power. It's time to claim yours. Today on the Eye of Power podcast, it's my great pleasure to welcome Shane Spraggs to the program. Shane is with a company called Vertura, and they help organizations with their remote and hybrid work models, train managers to be better facilitators, and really help organizations elevate their culture. Might sound familiar to you. That's what we do with the Eye of Power, of course, through greater respect, greater trust, and greater skill with the management team and how they communicate and align and engage their workforce. So Shane, he has the chance to share a number of great insights as it relates to this kind of thing with us today. So let's welcome Shane to the program. Look, the workplace is radically different, not just stylistically, but in very fundamental ways that we either adapt or we're going to suffer consequences.
Well, yeah, and it's adapting in ways it's changing in ways that are giving employees more opportunity these days. And I actually heard it put very well the other day, is that remote work or hybrid work gives companies a perk they can give to their employees that they haven't had before. And there's not a lot of perks offered. Certainly not to people in North America in terms of working conditions and vacation times and whatnot. But if you can offer the opportunity for someone to work from home for 2 or 3 days a week, then that gives them more flexibility with their home life. And I think that's one of the big changes that's happened over the last few years, especially during the pandemic, was, wow, life is short. Let's not waste it at the office. Right. And everyone, well, a large percentage of people just kind of woke up to that. Like, okay, well, yes, I can spend my time building my career, but in that process, I miss my family growing up and other things that are more important to me in this short life we have. Right. And I experienced that. I worked at Disney of 2010 to 2015, and it was 60, 70-hour weeks. And I have photos from my family that time that I'm in. I don't remember.
Wow.
I've got no idea where this was, because your typical, I mean, sure, you've experienced this as well. Your brain kind of shuts down certain areas when you're exhausted and tired. Memory is one of them, right? You just don't, it's not important. We'll find another one of those eventually. Let's not bother remembering that. And fortunately, that's 5 years of my daughters growing from 6 to 11, that I'm not going to get back.
That is a rough pill to swallow right there. And, times however many millions of people have experienced something like that, or far worse than that, where they just weren't physically there. They were just physically absent. And
exactly. Yeah.
And as it relates to, the human condition, we know what's important in life, right? Because everybody on their deathbed, no one's saying, man, I should have spent more time at the office, or I wish I'd gotten that promotion, or I wish I'd brought this project home. They're focused on their relationships. I wish I was closer to my son. I wish we'd been able to do that. It's all comes down to our people, right? That's the currency that matters to us. Would you see it the same way, Shane?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I have a bit of a different spin on it as well. Is that over the years of my experience is that I see that the people who are more productive take that into consideration. The companies that give recognize that, hey, you're not going to get 11 hours out of somebody. You're going to get them 11 hours of them sitting at a desk, but not necessarily 11 hours of productivity. And there's been many studies that show, I think I started in software development, and back in my day, it was pretty common for you to code for hours and hours on end and feel productive. But that doesn't take into account the number of mistakes you made, the quality of the work you created, the ability for you to collaborate with others and work together on something. And I similar experience, another good experience or example was, I remember at one point being up at like midnight working on something. I was actually at the office at the time, and I was there. I was having a really, really productive coding session, and then I looked up and it was 2:00. Someone lost 2 hours, and I realized what in that time was if someone was watching me, they would have saw me doing this, right? But for my mind, because I was exhausted and tired, and in a zone, it was just kind of I was going, right. And I don't know if the work I created that night was valuable or used or had bug free, but it certainly was a stark reminder to me that that you need rest. We are machines to a degree, but like any machine, we need fuel, and we need to be taken care of, and the oil has to be changed occasionally. So it's really important for employers to consider the mental well-being and physical well-being of their employees if they want more money out of them. And to me, that's the connection that I try to make with employers, is that what are you trying to get out of this? You have these individuals who are here. How do you make them more productive?
The productivity, of course, that's a very well studied topic, right? How getting the most out of your teams, and how do we expand our performance levels and so forth. And it does come back to there's a reason that movies are 2 hours. There's a reason that
Yes,
there's
exactly.
like there's physical limitations, and it gets a little skewed because we remember the stories from sort of the ends of the spectrum, right? So everything's a Pareto distribution. So there'll be those individuals that, given certain seasons, can do heroic efforts. And we
Yeah.
say, well, so and so can work straight for 6 hours without a break. Why can't you? What's wrong? And this is a classic trap everybody falls into, where they reductionist thinking, where we think we understand the presenting issue because it's this or this factor, these few factors, and we're blind to the 20 other factors that we aren't considering. Our picture then becomes a caricature of the world rather than a model that helps us navigate the world better.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's just thinking across the board, whether it's productivity or really anything else we want to consider.
Yeah,
So
and one of the best teams I was on, it was a small app development team, and we didn't have necessarily any super standout coders on the team. They were all good, but we worked together so well that we were highly productive, and we everyone understood their role. I like to say, everyone understood the assignment, which was, when we had our daily stand-ups, they weren't listening. They weren't there to provide their update. They were there to listen to other people's updates. And those little nuances that got everyone working together produced a very successful product, and I was quite proud of the work we created, because it was just exceptional.
what you're introducing there, it seems to me, Shane, is the factor of engagement and how people are motivated, right? So when you're part of a highly functioning team and you're emotionally invested in everybody else with mutual respect, you don't have to like or love them as individuals. You have to
Yeah,
be rooting for them. You have to be wanting them to, you want to contribute to their efforts. You want them to contribute to yours. And you're engaged in the overall output of the product. That's how the military functions, right? You
yes,
get like when life is on the line, you want people really rooting for the other people, and they've got each other's backs, and they'll be self-sacrificing, and the values that they're judging everything by is the group and the mission more than do I feel like it, or I did it yesterday, or
yeah.
that person said something I don't like, so they can just wait. So it's those human dynamics that we ignore at our own peril.
Yeah, absolutely. And the having as you started the conversation, having a purpose that everyone can align under is key to that.
So, what do you see? Let's dive into some of the sage words of advice you might have for our audience. What are some of the ways that you see leaders fuel that function of the highly functioning team? Either going back to your example where you were part of that team, what did leaders do to fuel it, or what do they do to destroy or erode that feeling?
Right.
Shane, would you say?
Well, it's irrespective of where they work. Location doesn't matter, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well. That it comes down to trust. How much trust do they have in their teams to go and do the work that they've been hired to do? And that, for me, I follow very closely. I follow along with the self-determination model that was proposed by Richard Ryan and Edward Deci back in the 80s. And part of that is, they talk about autonomy, competency, and relatedness. And what trust comes from is if someone's competent and you feel a relationship to them and you relate to them, that's where trust comes from. People are a lot more willing to let them work on things. And unfortunately, for many leaders, they don't form those relationships with their team. They don't understand their abilities to do the work. They just see them as numbers and work, people who are fulfilling their needs. And so, for a leader to have, to develop trust with their team, they need to have significant amount of empathy and high emotional quotient with their high EQ with their team members, and then have ways to monitor it and have some guardrails so that there's some adequate feedback loops from the employees up to the leadership team, so the leader can get the information they need to do their job.
So the adequate feedback loops is an interesting focus in terms of what gets in the way there. Why don't leader, or how do leaders develop sort of leaky loops or blind spots?
Well, it goes both ways. You can micromanage a team, but you can also ignore a team, and that also creates dysfunction as well, especially if you don't give them the information they need to thrive and the feedback they need to know they're on the right track. Predominantly, it comes down to we talked about earlier, purpose, and then the objectives you're trying to accomplish to achieve that purpose, and the work that if it's done well, the work that is identified that to accomplish those objectives. And it also, any individual should know the work that they're doing, how it ties into the purpose of the company, and that's easier said than done. But I find companies will often do a lot of work to establish yearly goals, and let's say they have got five goals or 5 rocks that they're working on for the year, but yet, this department over here has a couple that don't really roll up underneath that. It's like, well, what are they doing? Well, why are they doing those things when it's not? And so that's where, from a leadership standpoint, they really have to be aware of the goals they're trying to accomplish, or whatever you want to call them, the priorities of the year, and make it their responsibility to execute on those, as opposed to getting too involved in the day to day. So that's where a lot of companies, I'm sure you've encountered this as well, they'll spend lots of time at the start of each year, maybe a 2-day offsite, or to put together a plan for the year, but then they don't revisit it for months and months and months and months. And if you're not looking at this regularly, you're not staying in touch with what's happening on the ground and whether it's on the right track to accomplish the things you set forth in the yearly plan. So So I'm kind of rambling here on this one, but
No, I understand.
From it's all very fundamental. It's very basic. We hear about it, talked about all the time, but it sometimes the least sexy thing just needs to be done, right? And that is to follow up on the plans on a regular basis and see where people are and have them explain to you in their own words how they feel about the progress they're making. Have some evidence they can share that that gives you some confidence that they're on the right tracks and metrics, and all that's doable. But it all starts with having some real clear goals and clear goals that people agree with, because they're realistic and applicable to where the company is and the direction they're headed.
The thing that I was thinking about as you're laying that out, Shane, is the job of leadership to really focus on alignment, being clear. And it seems like the things you were pointing there, the phrase that came to my mind was the vagaries of personality. So in other words, we get pulled off of alignment because either my individual alignment is not lined up with the group, or it might be external forces like a market or a customer demand,
Right.
or a reality from a vendor, or some other sort of strategic relationship that gets us a little bit off center, and it pulls some people off and maybe not others. So then you can get sort of discord as to what the priorities are and why. And I always go back to the Covey quadrant, where it's the getting the urgent but not that important, and putting our priorities there as opposed to the very important but not urgent. That seems to be one of the battles in this realm that we're talking about, that we can get a little bit off track. So let's take it to an area where you're specifically versed and expert as it relates to the remote work and the modern organization, where some of this alignment work, it's a lot easier when we're proximate, right? When we're there each day and we have the chance to have uncountable little interactions that we communicate small things that over time end up being big. You take those things away and people can tell the difference for sure. What are some of the things that you see that that leads to success in this specific dynamic of team alignment and engagement?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of having some fundamentals that people can keep in the back of their mind, and along with what you're basically talking about is that in the office you have the opportunity for organic interactions, and remotely, and even for most hybrid businesses, that has to change to intentional. And I want to take it one step further. Organic in many ways is just luck. It's chance, right? And so if you are not intentionally looking at the processes of the business that you want to have to be successful, then you are leaving things to chance. And so yes, if you take an organic business and put them into a remote work environment and you do nothing else, things like innovation will suffer. Things like communication will suffer. People will have challenges with career paths and performance improvements and whatnot, and learning and development. There's a lot of things that slowly start to wither on the vine if you just take, as a lot of companies found out at the start of the pandemic, so they continue doing business as usual and then didn't make any changes that were necessary to support the type of company that they ran. The secret from my standpoint is that if a business makes these important things more intentional, then it's a superpower for any business, whether they're in the office or not. Just take innovation, for example. How does innovation happen at a company? Well, if you're relying on the water cooler to ensure that innovation happens, you're just going to be left behind by a company that's going to have plans in place to establish innovation. And that is, there's a myriad of things you can do, and it could be everything from having a skunk works team to having a period of time each week where people can work on their own stuff, or you set up intentional quarterly meetings with people to get together and discuss topics. It might mean that you are investing in somebody to look into the marketplace so that they can bring back information of what's actually happening in the marketplace to the team. There's a whole pile of things you can do to foster innovation. And if you aren't doing, and as I said, you have to do that in the office as well as remotely. And that's just one of many processes I think need to be established when you're a remote team. But if you do it well, you're going to it's a superpower for you. And there's lots of companies out there right now that are thriving remotely. There's a product here in BC called the Jane app, and they are scheduling health scheduling software where if you're going to schedule a massage or chiropractor or whatnot, they have this product that can sell to those small businesses that people can subscribe to that and book their meetings or book their sessions through that. It's doing quite well. They're really they're taking off all over Canada, and they're moving into the States now. You might see it soon. 400 people working together remote. They have some home offices. They bring people in. They've got Toronto, Vancouver, and I think Montreal as well. And people can get together, and they have plans for that. But for the most part, they hire from anywhere, and so they get to take advantage of both the best of both worlds.
That's interesting. The other thing I was wondering about as you were laying that out, Shane, is you mentioned as far as that organic versus intentional, zeroed in on the innovation. One of the things I think about a lot is the relationships and the connections. So for instance, when you mentioned some of these things are chance, I think they are chance, but they're also, we gravitate towards those people that we feel emotionally connected to.
Yeah.
And so it becomes, I used the phrase vagaries of personality earlier. It can be that way too, where you can get clicks or you can get people that are just naturally tuned to the same channel. But those connections are part of what drives at least some aspect of engagement. I know there's some research that indicates that people leave because of the relationships, or they stay because of the relationships they have. So it can hit our turnover rates and somewhat the level of our engagement. What, besides innovation, what are some of the things that you see in terms of when we get wise about our intentionality of the remote workplace, the other areas that we can see dividends?
Well, I'll go on to innovation. Innovation, relationships. That's a key one for obviously for companies to work together. The first thing I'll point out is that there are people who don't enjoy working remotely. Simply put, right? In fact, there was a study recently that if you took 10 people, 2 of them want to work remotely, One of them wants to work full time in the office. The remaining seven want to work some amount of 1 to 4 days in the office,
Interesting.
and that's fine. I'm not suggesting everyone should be forced to work remotely. And we're going to see that as a thing going forward. When you select the company you work for, that'll be another criteria you choose. If you're in a small town like I am, that's not necessarily connected to lots of large businesses, I might be looking for a remote job. If I'm in New York, hey, maybe I can come into the office once in a while. Maybe I don't want to go downtown New York. Maybe,
Yeah.
so there's, maybe that's a good reason why you want to do it once a week. Anyway, we're going to see a lot of variety of businesses going forward. And for me, I'm just looking at what in general makes a business successful. You're absolutely right. Relationships are vital to businesses. And I had a great experience last year. Went to a reunion of some of the people I used to work with at Disney, and there's about 40 of us in a pub that we all got together again. Many of them I hadn't seen in 8 years,
Wow.
and I was able to pick up the relationships with them just as if they were left off, and we had very comfortable conversations. It wasn't awkward. And as I was leaving there, I was like, okay, what is it about that scenario? What was it about the relationships I had with those individuals that is similar to the ones I have with the people at Vertera? There's people at Vertera who I've never met in person, but yet I have similarly strong bonds with them. And it's no different than a lot of the younger generation who might be playing Call of Duty or other online games, and they have friends that they have very strong social bonds with who they've never met in person.
Yeah.
And we've all seen these videos of the friends getting together for the first time after 5 years of playing the same game when they never met. And sure enough, there are some drivers to that you can manage. And one of the key things about this is you do need events, team building events, but these team building events have to be facilitated by either a person or computer. And this was the big mistake that, again, a lot of companies made when they first hit the pandemic, is they just continued trying to do things the way they normally would. And instead of doing, let's do a happy hour, right? So we're all sitting around on Zoom staring at each other. And I'll tell you, the larger proportion of the population is more introverted than they like to believe. And there's only a handful of people who really will start a conversation. And you end up with, say you have 20 people on a call, maybe 2 people are trying to make things happen. And most are just like, yeah, I don't want to deal with this. I'm going to sit at the other end of the call, staring at people, possibly eating lunch. And it's just an awful experience. You add some, again, it's intentionality to it, and you have someone whose job it is to facilitate that conversation and run an event. And it could be any number of things you can do. We've done exit style experiences. We've had there was a company that unfortunately just closed down, but they were allowing people to remotely control laser guided RVs that you could drive around and shoot each other. It was
Very
great
cool.
fun. And there's a number of these kinds of products and services out there right now that do this, or you can try to do it yourself. The interesting thing I find is that this same concept works in the office as well. If you are not an extrovert and you go to an office party, for many it's painful, right? And the best office parties are the ones like the Secret Santas, where there's an event where people can focus on it and not each other. And I like to use the example of again, back in the day when I was in the office, it wasn't uncommon to go out for lunch with, say, 14 team members, and you try to sit all across along one big long table. Well, there's people on that table you don't talk to at lunch. You get stuck to next to, and it becomes okay, where am I going to sit? I want to sit next to Aaron. I don't want to sit next to Frank or across. I want to get sit next to Nellie because I have a good relationship with her. That's what happens in real life as well. And if you had someone facilitating that conversation, those lunch meetups would be far more successful and productive for people, and people would enjoy them more.
That's freaking brilliant. I mean, because it plays in all aspects. Even I was thinking about going on vacation, for instance. Now I'm one of the 2 in the 20 that would be talking, so I'm that kind. I'm in that bucket myself.
Yeah.
But most people I know are not. And then so I had a couple experiences that really popped into mind as you were laying all that out, Shane. One was I was on vacation with my brothers and my nephew. And we were on a cruise with a lot of bands. So it was seeing concerts all day. And with all the bands there, you get a chance to meet the musicians we're all musicians. So we get to meet the musicians that we really respect. And it's super, super great fun. And, I'm the one who drives all that because I'll just go talk to anybody. I'm not,
right.
And they were uncomfortable a lot of the time. It's like, it's like, why are you uncomfortable? But it's a completely different experience. And the next year, those guys were all taking a break, and I'm going by myself. So that's one. And then the other one was I was on a corporate retreat with. I was one of a few external consultants that were invited to this, and it was among the attendees were their sales team, their relationship managers that all different territories throughout the eastern United States. You can imagine that the relationship managers, generally speaking, are gonna be on the extroverted side. Not all of them, but most. So
Yeah.
when you get to a table like that, you have maybe half the table sucking up 100% of the oxygen. And you could kind of
Yeah.
see, I'd look around and I'd see the people that weren't like that. There's no space for them to participate. They're just sitting there.
Yeah.
So if it was facilitated in the way that you described, you'd at least minimize that to some degree. And the people that feel like they're choked out of the conversation would at least have some manner of way to be heard and to participate.
Yeah, absolutely. And another company I worked for had these massive summer parties with all the entire team, and you could tell there was a large portion of them, the people who went to the party, just did their job and showed up for the first hour or two and then went home. And there was a very clear cliff where at some point in the night, a large portion of the people left and they went and did their own thing, and the party remained for the people who either had had enough to drink or we're naturally more inclined to hang out and enjoy the event that was put on. And then unfortunately that translated into the office environment and how people interact with each other. The same groups held their own spaces and didn't necessarily collaborate as much as they could. And I would argue that certainly relationships are important, but they also can do damage as well, and cause other people to leave. Can cause problems with the whole bad apple spoils the bunch. And one of the things I do like about remote work is that there's far less drama. There's more people focused on getting the work done, because I like to believe that most people want, when they, maybe this is another thing for leaders to think about, is that if you think that most people want to be there to do their job, then you're going to treat them differently than if you believe that they are just there to take your money, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and really early on in my first little while at Vertera, there's a book I have called virtual team building games. I set aside an hour every 2 weeks for us to go through them. And it was sort of we had this plan to, let's evaluate all these books. We're a virtual company. We should be able to, we should do this well. So we should have some insight onto which ones work. But what actually happened was that we all enjoyed each other's company and learned a bit more about each other. And we had a stronger relationship going forward sometimes because of how stupid these games were, because we shared that experience, right? The other thing I would strongly encourage, and this is, again, simple things that are often dismissed, but icebreakers are vitally important for remote workers. They, if you have a large meeting, I could spend lots of time talking about meetings as well. But if you are doing a largeish meeting, and you can have an icebreaker at the start of it, and obviously you want to be tactful about it. You don't want to turn it into the Walmart greeting. I'm sure you've heard about when the people come to work at Walmart first thing in the morning, there's a workout routine and a chant they do. We don't want to do that to your company. We don't want to force people to do things that are uncomfortable. But simply asking them a question like, "Hey, what did you guys have for breakfast this morning?" It doesn't feel like an icebreaker, but you give everyone a chance to say it. You learn a little bit about somebody because you can then expand on it. Well, why are you doing that? Why did that happen? Or something. One of my favorites is share a smell that reminds you of your childhood.
Oh, that's a good one.
There's a lot in there, and people tend to like to talk about it. It's not, and what happens with icebreakers is it's a shortcut to the kinds of conversations, the kind of information you learn from somebody after you have the small talk, and it's that information that fosters relatedness.
Right. So it's almost like you're throwing mooring lines of connection. Like if we were ships, we were sort of throwing
Yeah.
lines of connection so that we're together in that way. That's a great point, Shane. I like that. I know we're running a little bit short on time. A lot of what you just threw out there, we could delve into in depth. You mentioned, I mean, in terms of, for instance, group meetings on group remote meetings where you can't tell whether people are even, sometimes they'll turn their video off. And now in that case, I figure they're not even there if their video is not on. But for the little bit of time we might have left, if you could sort of give us a little bit of your wisdom as it relates to a couple of things that people might pay attention to if they're participating or putting together say a meeting of more than 5 or 6 people, that, what they might pay attention to. Icebreaker is one of them. What other things might they pay attention to maximize the productivity
Yeah,
and
I'll take a step back. Companies who are with remote workers, they need to invest in facilitation training. Everyone who runs a meeting needs to be able to run a meeting, and it's not a skill you are born with. Maybe some people, but generally it's something you need to learn. And it comes down to having a host who can both listen and interject. Having someone who can say, "Okay, Tom, just 2 seconds. I want to give Eric a chance to finish what he was saying," that type of thing.
right. So you don't have people taking up too much of the bandwidth of the, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's very easy to let someone talk for 2/3 of the meeting and you get nothing done.
Yeah.
But I also, we did a study on meetings. Actually, we did a study in 2021 on Zoom fatigue, and then we redid the study in 2023, and we found out, based on the change of the data, that it was actually not talking about Zoom fatigue. We're talking about meeting fatigue. And meeting fatigue is really the challenge. We actually polled 1,500 people across 12 countries and 15 industries, and a good split between hybrid, remote, and in office, and manager and employee. And what we found was that people have too many meetings just in general. And on those meetings, a lot of people felt, almost half the people felt that the meetings that they were having were not necessary in the first place. And I could dive into spending probably tons of time talking about meetings in general, but looking at camera, for example. So having a camera on is great for situations like this. I've never met you up until this point. I can see your face. You're nodding. You're interacting with me at a level that's not just audio, and that's valuable to me when we're having a two-way conversation. If you're presenting to a bunch of people and you're not relying on that information from people, does the camera need to be on? And I'd flip it around. And in fact, I firmly believe that forcing people to sit there and stare at a camera for an hour long meeting is a bit tantamount to torture. Strong words there, I understand it, but you're forcing someone to sit there and stare. Whereas in an office, if I'm sitting in an office, I'm listening to someone present, I'm checking the clock, I'm looking around, maybe looking out the window, I'm fidgeting in my chair a bit, maybe paying attention to other things, but I'm still able to follow along, because it doesn't take much to follow along to what someone's presenting. YouTube has the ability to speed up presentations, and I can watch a TED talk at 1.5 times and get just as much out of it. So you can't tell me that a meeting that Jason created that morning is going to be any more well presented than a TED talk that I zoomed through that earlier that day. So we have to really think about meetings in a new way. In the office, a lot of meetings are set up just because out of laziness. People don't do the work they need to do to get the work to bring the results they need to have a conversation. The best one, for example, is talking about your yearly priorities without looking at what the market's saying, feedback from your employees, feedback from your customers. And doing a proper strengths, weaknesses. People let's just get together and talk about our priorities. And before long, you're way back. You haven't introduced any new information into the conversation, and people are just no further along than they used to be. So we advocate doing a lot more upfront work. Hey, we're gonna have this conversation. I need you to bring this to the table. Or if you're simply just communicating, is the information interesting to them? Do they want to listen to it? Do they need to hear it? And then that's all hands, for example, all staff. There's some important things there that people need to hear. But can you also put that in an email? Can you also maybe record portions of it and allow people to digest it asynchronous? So I encourage people to rethink how they communicate with people, because a meeting is useful when you have a purpose, such as making a decision or developing a plan, being creative, brainstorming. And I believe the tools are available, things like Miro and others that you can use remotely and have equal, if not better, conversations virtually with people. But if you're just there to listen, I think it's time to rethink that.
That's good. I couldn't help having smiling at the images of The Office. I don't know if you ever saw that show where Michael Scott would just anything that come up, meeting everyone in the conference room at the drop of a hat. It's all the mistakes that you are pointing to. They were getting captured in so every episode of that show.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a brilliant show from that standpoint, and sadly dated now.
Yeah, really, right? Yeah, but the psychological traps remain. Shane, and the
Yeah.
way that you said it, rethink how you communicate. In other words, I think what I get from, and it's kind of the thread throughout our conversation. So maybe this is a good way to tie it all together, Shane, is back to that word that you used of intentionality, of really being aware of, okay, what is the output here, and what is the best path to get that output,
Yeah.
and not just rely on habit, convention, the easiest path, what I saw another person do necessarily. Really be intentional about getting the best. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier. I'd say you started with the concept of trust, right? In terms of developing high functioning teams. And that starts with respect. So it's almost impossible to build high trust and respect if you don't have that habit of wanting and being the best, and looking at okay, it's respectful to not want to waste the person's time. So why should I just, and it's disrespectful to say, hey, come here and get here. I just need to tell you this real quick,
Yeah.
just to click my box, regardless of what it's doing for you.
Yeah.
So it does sort of come down to that respect. I see respect and trust being very
Yeah,
close
absolutely.
together. And I see them as ingredients that are non-negotiable if you want to have the highest level of culture in an organization. Those are the ingredients you have to have, it looks to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And the people who need to understand and learn these skills are managers, and they're time and time again the most poorly trained skill set, in any business. Someone does really well at building the widget they build. I guess you can go manage the people who do and we don't invest enough in management training. And I got some management training over the course of my career, but a lot of it was learned, by being curious and listening to podcasts and doing my own experience, my own
Yeah, in
learning for it.
the Pareto curve, you were out on the tail. Right? You were proactive,
Yeah.
investing in yourself. And that's not everybody. Not everybody's going to do that. It takes a certain.
I was told to do one-on-ones. Well, I got to learn how to do a one-on-one before. I don't want to do it wrong. I don't want to waste anyone's time.
There
So
you
yeah,
go.
that's just, and that's one of many things that managers, they need to know how to facilitate meetings. They need to know how to handle conflict. There's tons of things, and it's got to be more than just a one-off conference or seminar. So for remote teams that think that they're saving money because they don't have an office, they need to reinvest that money into training and learning and development for their team, especially their management side of things, and they'll pay back in spades.
I love it. I actually have an episode that I'm working on. Some of my episodes are just me talking. Actually, that used to be what the podcast was, and only in the past half a year or so have I gotten into the interview format, which I do absolutely love. But I still sprinkle in sometimes just some content. And one of the ones I'm working on is on the thing you just said about webinars and seminars. And you got to be careful. You're not just checking boxes and things.
Yeah.
They're good. It's information, but without the context and all the things that we've been pointing to, is it really worth the effort? Is it really worth that expense and energy and time? And oftentimes the answer is no. If you're just, so yeah. Anyway, well, thank you. You shared a whole bunch of wisdom with us, Shane. So, what can people do to get more of what we got a little tiny look here, but anybody who's listening that wants more of that, obviously you have Vertera. What can people do to find you and
Sure.
gain more knowledge?
Appreciate it. And the easiest thing is to buy my book.
Yeah, there we
So,
go. I'm
so
gonna buy it.
yeah, we launched this last year. Probably the worst timed book in probably not the history, but this came out. Power of Remote came out in February of 2023, right around the time Return to the Office started becoming a big movement. And at that time, it was Return to the Office is remote work is dead. Return to the Office is king. And that sentiment lasted until about September, October last year. And since then, we're starting to see far more information about more people warming up to the idea of not just remote but hybrid as well. Which really, if you're doing hybrid well, it's remote first, not hybrid, which means you can work with anybody at any time, anywhere, whether you're in the office or not. I'm a big proponent on some of the benefits of the office, but only if you do it well. You don't want people going to the office to work remotely. So that and our website, Vertera.com, has lots of information on it. We have tons of blogs and stuff we put up there. I welcome anyone to come invite me to connect with me online, on LinkedIn. Sorry, and it's Shane Spraggs. It's my there's very few people named that, so you'll find me pretty quickly. I also do presentations. I was presenting to an all hands for a company not too long ago about these sorts of topics, and so feel free to invite me to your business, and more than happy to share my knowledge.
Well, Shane, thank you so much for being with us today. I very much appreciate your knowledge and your giving spirit. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. It was great talking with you.
This has been the Eye of Power podcast with Tom Dardick. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd also like to thank my brother, Scott Dardick, for the music and his music production. If you'd like to reach me, simply email Tom at dardickcommunications.com.